I first started at radio, and there would be, every week there would be literally dozens and dozens of CDs. And believe me, once that word gets out that you're unreliable, that you won't show up, forget it. You will. Your reputation. It's an incredibly tight industry. Everybody knows. You'd be amazed how many people know each other. Like you might go through 10,000 people that don't like your music, and then somebody does, and that person could open the doors.
I'm joined today by Roy Basnett, a local radio DJ and owner of this beautiful pod cafe space that we're recording in today. How are you, Roy?
I'm very good. Thanks for inviting me onto your show.
Just for the listeners at home, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your journey in radio so far?
Okay. Well, I currently present the daytime talk show on Liverpool Live Radio, which is a radio station based in the heart of Liverpool, between 10 and 1 o'clock in the day. And basically what that is a bunch of people that can be anything from celebrities to people who are doing stuff in the local community, politicians, all kinds of stuff, anything really. And they'll come along and I'll speak to them on the show. And the way I ended up being where I am now goes back to around about 1997, and prior to that point I had been a club DJ, pub and club DJ, and I developed a comedy act, and I was putting that into my routine, and we took it a step further. We started making little spoof videos. This is way before TikTok and all of that. Started making spoof videos, stood for election in 1997, that's another story. And a friend of mine had said that radio station up in Lancashire, Rock FM, were looking for somebody to front up their roadshow. They had a truck that was travelling around the northwest. They were looking for people. You had to go down and do an audition. If you got an audition, they would give you, possibility to be on the truck and be the front man of the roadshow. So I went down, did the audition, and basically ended up doing the job. And I was happy doing that because I didn't really have any ambitions to be on radio. But then my then boss at the time, Paul Jordan, had said, "We need to do something with you." And I was like, "Oh, right, okay." So they give me what was called a graveyard slot. This is the kind of 12 till 6 in the morning job. Yeah. And I did that, and I was okay. It wasn't exceptional. And then I covered a few shows, and it wasn't quite there. And then it was suggested that I do the talk show, and that was the late night talk show. And I got that straight away. I really understood it because the difference between music radio and talk radio is that you are limited within the time when you're doing a music-based show, because you know that people are listening because they want to hear the music. So you can't really be a little bit, go off on a tangent with your conversation, whereas you can if you're doing talk radio. So I did, and I ended up doing that, and it was quite successful. I ended up getting that job, and I've been now, this would be the fourth radio station that I'm working on now, where I've been able to specialise in talk radio, which is my preferred show to do. But I've managed in my time, because I've done a lot of breakfast shows, I've done drive time, and they are very music-led shows, so you get a good understanding of how the industry works, which has changed quite radically in the last few years. It used to be the case that when I first started at radio, and there would be, every week there would be literally dozens and dozens of CDs that were sent in by music companies saying, "You need to be playing this song," and they'd have a little bit of a blurb on it, and you need to be playing this, you need to be playing this. And at the time, each individual radio station had their own program director who would determine whether that song would end up on the playlist. It's much more centralized now, and for the big organizations, whereas those individual radio stations up and down the country would have had that person doing it, one person does it now. So that is one of the big changes. And so, if you like, there's less people available to impress to get your track played, if you like.
Yeah, and on top of that, there's just even more competition from more artists trying to get on the radio in the first place, right?
Well, there is, and there's competition generally exists in absolutely everything now, whether it be in the music industry, acting industry, comedy, the workplace, it doesn't matter. So in order for you to to be successful in what you want to do, you do need a different angle. You want to make sure that people are like, "Oh, wow, okay, that's a bit unusual." And of course, one of the big things, the advantages of the way music is now, is that you can establish an audience before you even get on the radio. Years ago, in order to establish an audience, you would need to be on the radio. Hence the reason why you had record pluggers that would come around a radio station saying, you need to be playing this song. But now, if you are prepared to put the spade work in and, get yourself noticed so that you can demonstrate the fact that 250,000 people follow your YouTube channel and, they see what you're doing, then the radio station is going to think, well, that's popular. Those people who like that music are going to translate into listeners for the radio station. Yeah, we'll play your song. So it works quite well like that now.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose with all those different avenues, do you still think radio is important for artists in promoting their music?
Yeah, definitely. Because, there's certainly, from a generational point of view, you still have a lot of people that do listen to the radio for music. Now, we're kind of an interesting point. And I remember being in Rock FM back in, I want to say, early part of the 2000s, and a guy had come down to speak to us to talk about what was the super youth. And what they meant by that was effectively people who were in their 40s, right? Whereas traditionally back in the day, you're in your 40s, you're a pipe and slippers man, all of that kind of stuff. If you went back to the 50s and 60s, and that's what people were doing. But super youth people were still going to gigs, still going and buying music and all of this kind of stuff, and taking an interest in the music industry. So that meant that there's more longevity for people to buy records, as it were, because people are listening and actively being involved in the music industry than they did perhaps a generation previous and what have you. So these days, it is, you're right. To come back to the point you're making, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But to come back to the point you're making, is radio still relevant? Yeah, because I'm part of this super youth generation, if you like. And, we were brought up on radio. So, I get in my car, I put the radio on. Sometimes it might be Radio 1 or a commercial radio station. Sometimes it might be Radio 4. I'll turn it off when the Archers is on, but that's another story. But the value of it, certainly for people of my age, absolutely. Now, of your age, then you'd have to answer that question. I think, and that's not because, younger people are not that bothered about the radio. You haven't been brought up on it. You've been brought up on different listening mediums like your phone, iPod, and whatever the streaming platforms that there are. So things are radically different in terms of how people listen to music now. But of course, the big thing is there still a value for radio in terms of an artist getting some, traction? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think as much as all these other forms of promotion and streaming services and things are important, I did some research, and I think radio is much more popular than people assume it is. I think I was reading, so it said 88% of the UK tune into radio weekly for an average of 20 hours a week. And that there's a little bit of a renaissance going on within radio with some things like smart speakers like Amazon Alexa and things like that, where I think it says 64% of people who own a smart speaker listen to the radio on it, which is sort of bringing radio back a little bit, I think. But
I think it would have been, you see that with vinyl. People buy vinyl, they pay a lot of money to go, for vinyl. For me personally, because I remember when the CD first landed and the difference in quality was incredible. I loved it. I thought, this is great. And yet you had the purists at the time were saying, oh God, this is killing music. Because, they wanted to hear the friction between the vinyl and the needle. I don't. I always remember, it's a true story, this actually, that when CD first came out, there was a company offering to put the hiss back onto the CD so it sounded more like vinyl. Not me. The clearer that it can be, the better. I think, the way people, still listen to music is massive, you know what I mean? And the way people kind of, access it. Obviously, the world's a lot different, but there's people still. I was impressed by those statistics there, to be honest with you, because I thought, wow, it's still as popular as that. Yeah, I need to tell my radio boss might get a pay rise.
Yeah, I think there's a sort of perception that it's not as big as it actually is, because I think there's also a bit of a sort of growth in sort of alternative online and digital radio stations. Like, I mean, here in Liverpool, we've got Melodic Distraction, and across the nation, there's platforms like Mixcloud that allow people to sort of make their own online radio stations and sort of develop an audience through there. And there's so many opportunities now in radio, sort of maybe more than there were 10 years ago, I think. And another platform that's similar to that is BBC Introducing, which is a great way for artists to be able to submit their music free of charge to their local BBC station. So there's definitely a lot more opportunity there than there was 10 years ago.
I think the other thing is as well is that there is still the perceived, what's it called? What's the word I'm looking for there? The premium of being on radio. It's still a bit of prestige that you've got on the radio. So it still has that gravitas in that sense, because I mean, you know yourself that if people are going to be using Mixcloud and all of them, then that's down to the individual artist to kind of get that to become popular. And you think, well, if you're on the radio, then you're recognised as doing something, and it does give you that little bit of prestige, I think. Yeah,
do you think it sort of builds that sort of credibility for artists as well?
I would say so, because I mean, as I said, you can look at the figures that you would have on a platform somewhere and think this many people like my music, but if you're talking about going on the radio, then obviously somebody's made a decision. Yeah, that's good. We want a piece of it, and therefore it gives you a bit more credibility, I believe.
Yeah. How does radio stand out then in comparison to some of those other forms of music promotion we were talking about?
Well, again, I think it would probably be that historical kind of background that people of a certain age brought up on it. Radio. Yeah, I heard this on the radio the other day. It sounds like a great thing, and the randomness of it as well. Because I mean, if you were a fan of a band and you've got them on your iPod or whatever it is or something like that, you can listen to it whenever. Whereas you could just be driving along and you're listening to the radio and your song comes on. I mean, that is like, wow. And you think to yourself, you look around, you think all of these people can listen to my music right now. It's happening. They haven't literally got to go to a website and say, I want to listen to that. So the power of it is still enormous. Yeah. One thing I would say though, with regards to, what the whole thing about your podcast is about here, and people would say, people, how do you get into radio? And I've even, I've had a lot of actors that's been on the show and they'll say, how do you get into acting and all of that kind of stuff. Well, the first thing that I believe is, fundamentally, you've got to have your skill, you've got to have your product. And then you've got to know people, because, people say, oh, you've done okay, you've worked on 12 radio stations. Well, the first one, I got in through an audition. But subsequent radio stations that I've been to after that, I knew people. People say, hey, Roy, I'm moving up here. Do you want to come? Yeah, brilliant. So it's important to have your contact book. Huge. Yeah. And the other thing is that if you say to somebody, I'm going to that gig, I'm going to be there. Because you will tend to find that people who, say, I have it with, when I've done radio stuff, and you tend to find it happens with reality stars quite a bit, and you can see they want to advance, they want to be someone. And they'll say, well, come on the show, and then 5 minutes before, I can't make it. And believe me, once that word gets out that you're unreliable, that you won't show up, forget it. You will, your reputation, it's an incredibly tight industry. Everybody knows. You'd be amazed how many people know each other within the entertainment world, even though there are tens of thousands of people involved in it. And that is the real important thing. You need to go to the opening of an envelope. If you really believe in your music, the music will not be good enough to just get you there alone. Yeah. You've got to be able to package that. You've got to be able to sell that. You've got to be able to make sure that, people know, what your music's all about. And you do that by having as many contacts as you possibly can.
Yeah. And that having those contacts is something that directly applies to getting your music on the radio as well, isn't it? It's knowing the right people.
Yeah. I mean, back in the day, when I was talking about that you would have people that would be hawking dozens and dozens of CDs saying, listen to this, listen to that, there would have almost been an inevitability that a music planner would have been doing a favour for somebody because they liked that person. They thought, well, I don't particularly like that song, but it's Johnny, he's amazing. Yeah, I'll put his song on. And there's probably been so many songs that have been big hits because of that. So that's what I'm saying. But you develop your relationship with these people. It's vital. If you don't know anybody, it's going to be a struggle. Some people will get on to where they want to go by sheer luck. There's a tremendous documentary on about Wham at the moment, which I watched, and I don't know if you're a Wham fan, but it doesn't matter. It's worthwhile watching this documentary to show about how luck plays its part, because there was the first two songs, which are well-known hits for Wham, Wham Rap and Young Guns. the first one they brought out, Wham Rap, which I think it went to number 2 in the charts when it was re-released, didn't even get in the top 100. The other one didn't get in the top 40. It was only because somebody was on top of the pops and couldn't make it. A space became available, and they just happened to be the first person that got the call. The difference that made to them was completely life-changing, but they were prepared to do it. Now, that's a real luck option, but that only happens every so often. So you need to be working hard to get your product spotted. And the way you do that is by having the network. So network, and I mean network in a sensible kind of friendly way. If you just go up to people and you start shoving your card on the people's nose every time, they'll soon get fed up with that. But if you can think to yourself, I know that person, I've got things in common with that person, I'm at an event where I can speak to them, then you do it and then you enhance your network.
So in terms of pitching to radio stations for artists, how do, I know, as you said, it's often built on connections and friendships, but how do you and fellow radio DJs typically find the music you're going to play on your shows, if not through friendships? Is there?
It's just not like how it used to be. The radio station I work on at the moment, it's just a question of we'll listen to something, do we like it, we play it, because there's no pluggers knocking on our door as such anymore. So we would look at what sounds like the vibe that we've got for the station. We think, well, that's our sound. So this song's come out, it fits in with what we're doing. And a bunch of us will just sit down and we'll determine it and what have you. I mean, I've worked in it long enough to know what I think is going to be a hit and what is going to fit in with our music proposition and not jar with it. So that would be the case. But, in terms of if you were a new artist and you wanted to kind of get on a play on the radio, then you've got to, it's horses for courses. You've got to make sure that what you are selling fits with that radio station, and then say, we would like to do stuff for this radio station. That's the way to get you in. It comes back, there's a lot of crossover in what I'm saying about, how to get in, how to, network and all of that kind of stuff. But that would be the thing to do. Yeah.
I suppose, as you mentioned, it's important to sort of know who you're speaking to and with the radio station. Do you think you're better off pitching to as many stations as you possibly can, or are you better off finding those number of shows that are specifically suited to you?
I personally think, because of the way things are now, pitching to a radio station, the likelihood is that because these radio stations will get a lot of that going on, most of it will just end up in the bin, to be honest with you. I've seen it happen. So I think that you can't just send in the demo. You've got to send in a bit more about it. And you've got to say, we are a band and we have X amount of followers. We're doing this. We'd like to be involved in your radio station. So you've got to put like a sales pitch in. Yeah. You can't just let the music do the talking anymore.
Yeah. Would you say that something like a press release is a good way of going about that?
Definitely. But the radio station, commercial radio stations, for example, are obviously looking to make money from advertising. And therefore, they want to be able to point to an advertiser and tell them, look at how many people listen to our radio station. So if it's the case that you've got an artist that's got a big following, then on social media following, yourself, you might be able to translate some of those followers into listeners. So it's of interest to the radio station to be playing that band's material.
So in going back quickly to press releases, because I think it's, whilst pitching, as you said, it's a competitive field and it'll often be based on sort of social media and stuff. I think a press release can really sort of show the direction that you're going in. Even if you don't have the most followers at the moment, you can show, look, this is what I'm doing, this is how we're developing. Yeah. And if you sort of imply to them, like, if you play us now, then you can be almost one of the first people to play us.
Well, and that's the other thing. I mean, there's a bit of kidology required there. You've got to make these people, you've got to effectively get your radio station to buy into the vision that you're seeing. If they believe that, this is a band, they're new, but potentially these could be having millions of followers. If you can persuade not the artist, if you can persuade the radio station that this is where we're going, then that's the way to get it off the ground when you've not got the online data to kind of throw at it to say, hey, look, this is what we're doing. But if your vision, unfortunately, the day and age we live in, everything is about selling now, selling you. And I think you've got to do that with your with your product as well. You need to sell it
Yeah.
and sell the vision of what you're going to be doing in the future.
Yeah, I think the way that you can sort of get that across and that vision it's really important to sort of have that press release be sort of as professional as possible and sort of give you the sort of the almost the prestige of being a bigger artist than you are. So what do you sort of look for in a good press release?
Well, you want to see that they're working. You think, right, okay, if you just turn around and say, well, this person's saying they're doing this, but they're just in the rehearsals all the time. They're not getting out and gigging. So if I'm looking at it from the hard point of view, how much effort are they putting in to being noticed? Fundamentally, if the song's good, it will get your interest anyway. But I think there's a lot of times I've come across songs that were brilliant and I played them on the radio and they've gone on to be nothing because there's been no support network around that product, to say, this is the song we've got, this is where we're going with it, it's going to be here, there and everywhere. And if it hasn't got that, then it's like you say, you can have, if people come looking for you, Ollie, and nobody knows where your address is, they won't find you. So the music has got to be in there, but you've got to make sure that you've sold the vision to people to say, this is where we're going to be. Listen to the song's good, and look at the work that we're doing in order to get this noticed.
Yeah. I think one thing that's interesting that I've heard a story recently from a band called Sterling Press, who are based in Liverpool at the moment, about how they've managed to get their music played on, I think BBC Radio 6 it was, and other big radio stations through going to the station itself and giving them some free merchandise or still giving them physical copies.
Yeah.
Do you think stations and hosts still appreciate those sort of physical copies and merch and things, or is that something you've not particularly experienced?
I can only talk about what it used to be like when they used to get deluged with them years ago, is that you just physically couldn't listen to everything. We, in this very studio, Andy McCluskey was here a few weeks back, and Andy McCluskey was the front man of Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, and he told the story of how their song was never going to go anywhere. Right, I think it was Enola Gay or Electricity, that was it. Basically, I think it was Factory Records. If I've got this story wrong, I do apologise. But it was Factory Records owned by Anthony Wilson. And Anthony Wilson had this big bag of CDs, and his secretary said, what are you doing with them? He said, I'm taking them a tip. I'm getting all these demos sent in and everything. And she just happened to be looking through them. She said, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. Well, you've got to sign these. He said, no, why? He said, well, first of all, it's a great name. And then they put the song on. And they got heard.
It's just sort of so much, and it's even easier to delete an email than it is to bin a CD.
Yeah.
So it's I think it's just about sort of making those personal connections and trying to stand out.
I see that every single day that an email will come through with a song. Every single day, without fail, comes through, and the email just looks the same as any other email. It looks like an email that's coming from somebody that's just turning around and saying, "Is there any chance you can play some Girls Aloud?" or something like that. You've got to make sure that your email is a bit glossier. There's plenty of templates where you can come up with you can overlay your image onto some pretty sexy looking graphics and say, this is what we're doing. Bang, you see that straight away. You're going to stop and look at it. But if it's just purely text with loads of people saying, everybody loves our song, your gaze will not be focused on that. So first of all, if you're going to send an email, make sure you're accompanying it with some really, really good looking graphics, professional looking graphics, because people will take you more seriously and you get the attention.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose is that one of the sort of biggest red flags you'd look out for in an email
you've not. I'm going to say you've not been bothered enough to make your email, sexy enough for me to read it. Then I'm not going to listen to it. So the song could be marvelous, but you've got to, if you got sweets, if you get a tasty looking sweet and you put it in a lousy wrapper, then people won't buy it.
Yeah.
So that's one way I would look at it.
Yeah, when there's so much competition, people will judge a book by its cover in that sense because there's just so much competition. Yeah. So I suppose in a lot of cases when you sort of send that email or you sort of pitch to the radio, you will fail in a lot of cases. And I would doubt that there is a single artist in the world who hasn't been rejected from a radio station at some point who's pitched to one in the first place. So In your experience, what are sort of the common reasons why a radio submission might fail to sort of make a drop in the water?
Probably because it jars with the output. You know, people listening saying, well, it's not us that. You know, the production of it as well will make a big difference. If it sounds like it's been produced in someone's bedroom, that's not going to get it played. You get it. They're looking, because as I say, you don't have the pluggers, you don't have the radio programmers as such now. So you might have a collective of people who are responsible for the music, and they're looking for something that could be big down the line. You know, so that's the points I'm saying about the email. If you think, right, well, it looks like these guys are selling something that could be big, that's the big key thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth specifying as well that you say that you don't, they won't want to play something that sounds like it's been recorded in a bedroom. And I'd add to that you can definitely record something in your bedroom that doesn't sound like it's been recorded in your bedroom. Yeah. But it's having that sort of radio quality. I think mastering as well is particularly important for radio. I found that when I first submitted music to BBC Introducing, is that I got a line of feedback just saying it's not loud enough. So the mix isn't loud enough and it doesn't sound. It's not going to fit with the rest of the music that we're playing. But where you can, how important is it to get feedback, and what sort of questions should artists ask if they have any opportunity to get feedback from these stations or hosts?
Well, take feedback. That is the most important thing, and never consider yourself to be above it. I always have a personal example that I use. Before I got into radio, I was quite into amateur dramatics, and I did okay at it. You know, I was like, I'd go to a number of different places and I'd be given lead roles, so I thought I was quite good at it. And I remember doing this show one day, and I was probably in my mid-20s, late 20s when I was doing that, and there was a lad, he was only about 14, and we were rehearsing this big play, and this lad said something to me about, you're doing that wrong. And I was like, what? It's mean you're doing it wrong? What do you know about it? And I didn't take any notice. And then I looked back at it and I thought, he's right. I am doing it wrong. Because some people will criticize you because they don't like you and they're envious of what you do. Some people will like you and they criticize you, not criticize you because they're encouraging you to be better. So if somebody is giving you constructive criticism, take it. You know what I mean? But if it's just a general hater, I'm afraid you're going to have to get used to that. Yeah,
that's always going to happen. So there's always going to be people that don't like your music. But I think in the case of pitching to radio stations, a radio host who doesn't know you, if they're willing to give you feedback, has no reason to say something negative to make you feel bad about yourself.
You will very rarely come across an email that will say, could you play this song? And by the way, can you give me an idea of what you thought of it? Any areas? Very rarely solicit for feedback.
Yeah.
And I think it is important that you should do that. Even if you created some very simple mark out of 10 for this, that they can ease. There's no point in asking a radio guy, can you do a big long essay about this?
Yeah.
You're not going to get it. But if you can do something quick, I really thought this. What did it sound like? Mark out of 10, stuff like that. Simple things like that. So that, you are, but the likelihood is that they've listened to it, if they filled in some tiny little form to say that I think this song sounds like, it's worth doing in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure some people will disagree, but I think, in my opinion, whether you get your music played or manage to land into you on the radio or not, I would say that if you've emailed someone about your music potentially being played, and the way you've emailed, getting an email back is almost a success in itself. Even if it's a no and there's any feedback, even if it's just a very simple no, but maybe next time, to sort of building that relationship.
And don't get worked up if you don't get a response, because you've got to remember these people are very busy. It's nothing personal, but get used to that. You've got to get used to the rejection. If you look at Colonel Sanders, who created KFC, I think he was knocked back 1,000 times for his chicken recipe, but he got one in the end.
Yeah,
but his tenacity brought him through.
Is that the main piece of advice you'd have for artists to sort of stay motivated if they've faced rejection, just to keep going? Just
because somebody doesn't like you, you might go through 10,000 people that don't like your music, and then somebody does, and that person could open the doors.
Any final pieces of advice that you'd have for anyone looking to get onto the radio?
I go back to what I mentioned earlier about contacts. This is the most thing. Builds your confidence up as well, because in order to sell yourself, you need to be confident. And confidence is not something that you're born with. It is something that you have to develop, and it is not something that you might think, well, I'm not a confident person, I'm never going to achieve that. You will. You do that by speaking. It's just practice by speaking to people. Just go into if you go into a news agent, you buy a newspaper, have a little conversation with the person that you are. Or even if you just said, how's it? The weather's pretty miserable today, isn't it? It just gets you used to speaking to people in an instant environment. So that when you turn around, if somebody says, oh, come in and tell me about your song, and you go to pieces because you're not a confident person, won't help. But as I say, I'm not talking about exuding confidence, but confidence enough to be able to have a conversation. I had a guy came in today who was a work experience guy. So he's 15 actually. And, he came across very confident, not cocky, but he could hold a conversation. Yeah. And you think, wow, yeah, well, he sold himself there, and he could come and do more stuff with us. So that's the thing, believe in what you're selling, make sure you can sell it well, but don't be arrogant about it and that, and try and build those relationships that will ultimately get you in the shop window you want to be in.